Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below, because what I'm about to share with you is not just another story. It's something that changed how I look at everything, my music, my career, my friends, even my own sense of time. I've never talked about this publicly before, but there's a reason I'm speaking now. Something serious happened to Jimin, and the truth is, it changed both of us forever. It started on a night that felt like every other until it didn't. I had just finished a long day of rehearsals. My body was exhausted, my mind still racing from the sound of lights and cameras. The endless schedules that seem to swallow you whole when you're in this industry. The room was silent, except for the low hum of my air purifier and the faint buzz of my phone vibrating on the desk. I almost ignored it. It was late, too late for calls that weren't urgent, but something made me look. The name flashing on my screen froze me where I stood. It was Jimin's manager. For a second, I couldn't move. It was one of those moments when instinct knows before your mind does. My chest tightened as I picked up the call. The tone on the other side wasn't casual, not like the usual updates about schedules or recordings. His voice trembled. Jungkook, something's happened. That sentence alone is enough to destroy your sense of normal. You stop thinking, stop breathing, and every second feels like an eternity trying to decode what those words could mean. The next few moments felt like a blur. Words like hospital, collapsed, and critical echoed through my head like distant thunder. I remember grabbing my jacket, not even realizing I was barefoot when I ran out the door. The Seoul night air hit my face cold, sharp, unforgiving, but it didn't matter. My heart was pounding too loudly. Every red light I passed, every car horn that screamed behind me, I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting there. When I arrived at the hospital, the smell of antiseptic hit me first. That sterile, emotionless scent that instantly tells you you're somewhere between hope and loss. The hallways were too white, too bright, and yet somehow suffocatingly dark at the same time. I saw familiar faces, staff from Hybe, security, Jimin stylists, all standing in silence, their eyes fixed on the floor. No one could meet my gaze, and that silence said everything. I rushed toward the room number the nurse whispered, my legs barely holding me. When I saw him lying there, pale, motionless, machines surrounding him, it was like time stopped. Jimin, the person whose laughter used to fill every room, the one who could calm me down with just a glance, now looked fragile, almost unrecognizable. I could still hear the steady beep of the heart monitor, but it felt like a countdown I couldn't control. I stood beside him, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch his arm. It was warm. Thank God it was warm. That single detail warmth was the only thing keeping me from breaking. A doctor entered quietly, explaining what had happened. Exhaustion, dehydration, a fainting spell that had triggered complications. He's stable now, they said. But it was close. Stable. That word echoed in my head like it meant nothing and everything at once. Because in that moment, I realized how fragile everything really is. Fame, success, plans, even time. We always think there's more time. More chances to say what we mean, to apologize, to tell someone how much they matter. But sometimes all it takes is one phone call to show you how wrong that belief really is. I sat there for hours, maybe longer. I couldn't tell anymore. The room was filled with the soft sound of machines, and outside the glass window, the city lights blinked like they were mourning too. I replayed every memory I had with him, our first year's training together. The nights we stayed up, talking about dreams, the fights, the laughter, the small moments that built our bond. It hit me how much I had taken for granted. How often I had chosen work over connection, performance over presence, the next song over the people who made it worth singing. People often see us BTS as unstoppable, as if we're made of energy that never runs out. But behind every performance, there's a cost no one sees. The endless rehearsals, the pressure to be perfect, the fear of letting anyone down, and Jimin had always been the one who carried that pressure quietly. Too quietly. He smiled for everyone else, even when he was breaking inside. I had seen it before, but I told myself he was strong, that he could handle it. That lie now felt like a betrayal. Around dawn, his eyes opened, just slightly. I remember the way his fingers moved before anything else, a small twitch, then a slow blink. And when his gaze met mine, I felt something shift inside me. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. That look, it said everything. It said, I'm still here. It said, I'm tired. And most painfully, it said, you didn't notice. When the doctor came back, he told me Jimin needed rest, not just physical rest, but the kind of rest that comes when you stop running from your own pain. He's been pushing too hard, he said, and so have all of you. That hit me harder than I expected, because he was right. We had been running for years, from city to city, stage to stage, camera to camera, chasing perfection while losing pieces of ourselves along the way. As the sun rose through the window, I saw its reflection on Jimin's face, soft and gold, almost like a second chance. I realized I hadn't looked at him like this in years, not as a performer, not as a teammate, but as a friend. Someone who once held my hand when I was afraid of failing. Someone who believed in me before I believed in myself. And now it was my turn to be there for him. That day changed me. Not because it was dramatic or tragic, but because it revealed something I had refused to see: how easily we mistake achievement for meaning. We tell ourselves that success will make everything okay, but it doesn't. Success doesn't replace presence. It doesn't fill the silence of a hospital room at 3 a.m. It doesn't erase the guilt of realizing you could have been more there for someone who needed you. I stayed by his side the entire day, just sitting there, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes just watching the rhythm of his breathing. The team came in and out, bringing food I couldn't eat, updates I couldn't process. I wasn't thinking about music or schedules or numbers. I was thinking about life, the small, unspoken things that slip through when you're too busy living for everyone else. When Jimin finally spoke that evening, his voice was weak but steady. He said, "Don't look at me like that. I'm fine." But there was something in his tone, a mix of sadness and relief, that told me he wasn't. I wanted to say 1,000 things. How sorry I was, how scared I'd been, how much he meant to me. But the words got stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. All I managed was, "You scared me." And he smiled, just a little. "You needed it." That night, I went home and sat in the dark. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hospital room, that stillness, that fragile reminder that everything we love can disappear in an instant. I realized that fame, no matter how bright it burns, can't protect you from loss. It can't protect you from time. And it definitely can't protect you from regret. In the days that followed, something changed between us. We didn't talk about what happened right away, but we didn't have to. The silence was different, heavier, but honest. Jimin started recovering slowly. And I started reflecting deeply. I began noticing how we live, like we're racing time. As if being busy is the same as being alive. But that call that night forced me to stop running. It forced me to ask questions I'd never dared to ask. What are we really chasing? And what happens when the people who matter most can't keep up? Sometimes I wonder if Jimin's collapse was the universe's way of waking us up. Because after that, everything, the noise, the fame, the schedules felt smaller. What mattered most wasn't how many songs we released or how many records we broke. It was the moments we almost lost. The quiet laughter after rehearsals, the hugs before concerts, the way we remind each other that we're still human beneath the lights. Something serious happened to Jimin. But what happened to me that night was different. Something woke up inside me, a kind of awareness I didn't know I needed. The realization that presence is the rarest luxury, and it's slipping away while we're busy achieving everything else. I want to share this because maybe someone out there is living the same way, constantly moving, constantly chasing, thinking there's always more time. But there isn't. You don't realize how precious a person is until you almost lose them. You don't realize how alive you are until you're forced to stand still. And you don't realize how much you've missed until silence becomes your teacher. That night was supposed to be just another Wednesday, but it became the moment that cracked open everything I thought I knew about living. When I think about that week after Jimin's collapse, everything feels like a blur wrapped in slow motion. The days stretched into each other, long, quiet, fragile. The kind of silence that follows an earthquake when you're still checking if the ground beneath you is stable. I would wake up every morning and instinctively check my phone, half expecting another call that would shatter everything again. But it didn't come. Instead, there were small updates from the doctors, messages from the members, and photos. Jimin's nurse sent me showing he was slowly regaining his strength. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something else, a mix of gratitude and guilt that refused to settle. It's strange how one moment can rearrange your entire understanding of life. Before that night, I measured time in achievements, albums, concerts, milestones. Everything existed in numbers and deadlines. But sitting in that hospital room, watching Jimin sleep with wires running across his body, time stopped feeling linear. It became something I could almost touch, something fragile and sacred. Every breath he took felt like a gift I hadn't deserved. When he was finally allowed to have visitors again, I went back to see him. The hallways were quieter this time. The bright lights that once felt harsh now seemed softer, almost forgiving. I remember knocking on the door lightly, and his voice faint but steady, saying, "Come in." He was sitting up, his hair a little messy, his eyes tired but alive. Seeing him like that felt like sunlight after a long storm. I didn't know whether to smile or cry, so I just stood there for a second, trying to remember how to breathe. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. His tone was gentle, teasing, but I could hear the weight behind it. I laughed weakly, sitting down beside him. "I haven't. You scared me, Hyung." He smiled, but not the usual bright one. It was smaller, almost melancholic. "I scared myself too." He looked down at his hands for a while before continuing. "You know what's weird? When everything went black that night, I didn't think about the music, or the fame, or the fans. I thought about the one moment I never got to say thank you. To you. To everyone. Isn't that strange?" I didn't know how to respond, because in that moment, I realized I'd been living the same way, constantly moving, constantly producing, but never pausing long enough to say thank you for anything. Gratitude requires stillness, and stillness was something I had avoided for years. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the steady hum of machines, the quiet rhythm of life continuing around us. Then he said something that pierced me deeper than anything else. "I think the scariest part isn't almost dying," he said. "It's realizing how much of your life you've lived without being truly alive." That sentence stayed with me. It haunted me, because I knew exactly what he meant. We both had spent years living inside a rhythm too fast for the soul to catch up. From the outside, it looked like glory. But inside, it often felt like survival, moving from one expectation to the next, one performance to another, afraid that if you stopped even for a second, everything would fall apart. Jimin's words forced me to look at myself differently. For the first time in a long time, I saw how disconnected I had become from the things that truly mattered. I thought about all the times I had been physically present, but emotionally absent, laughing in interviews while my mind was elsewhere. Spending dinners with friends while thinking about the next recording session, listening to someone speak, but waiting only for my turn to respond. I thought I was living fully, but I wasn't. I was performing life instead of experiencing it. In the days that followed, I started spending more time in that hospital room. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We just sat there. I'd bring my guitar, quietly strumming melodies while he rested. The nurses would pass by and smile. Maybe because it reminded them that even in sterile places like that, music can make the air a little warmer. Sometimes, Jimin would hum along softly, almost imperceptibly, but I could hear it. The kind of sound that tells you someone's soul is still intact, even if their body is tired. One evening, the sun was setting outside the window, painting everything gold and orange. Jimin turned to me and said, "Do you remember our trainee days?" I laughed. "How could I forget?" He smiled faintly. "You were always quiet back then. I used to wonder what you were thinking when everyone else was talking." I told him the truth. I was scared. I thought if I said something wrong, I'd ruin everything. He nodded slowly. "And now?" That question caught me off guard, because I didn't have an answer. I realized I was still that same boy, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of losing control, afraid of not being enough. Only now, the stage was bigger, the lights brighter, the fear heavier. Jimin looked at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. "You don't have to be perfect to be present, Jungkook. Sometimes just showing up is enough." That sentence hit me harder than any criticism I'd ever received, because deep down, I knew he was right. I had built my life around perfection, every move, every note, every breath, measured against an impossible standard. But in chasing that perfection, I had lost sight of something simpler. Being there, being human, being real. Later that night, as I drove home, the city lights blurred against my windshield. I thought about what presents really meant, not just for Jimin, but for everyone who had ever cared about me. My family, the members, the fans who waited outside airports with tears in their eyes. I had always felt grateful for them, but I realized gratitude without presence is hollow. You can't truly thank someone if you're not there when they need you. I started writing again, not for an album, not for a project, just for myself. Words poured out that I didn't even know were waiting inside me. Lines about fear, about friendship, about silence and time and forgiveness. I didn't know if they would ever become songs, but that wasn't the point. Writing became a way to stay present, to feel instead of analyze, to breathe instead of perform. A week later, Jimin was discharged. He was thinner, slower, but his eyes carried a kind of peace I hadn't seen before. When I helped him walk out of the hospital, he looked up at the sky and said quietly, "It's strange how beautiful the world looks when you almost lose it." I didn't reply. I just looked at him, realizing how much strength it takes to see beauty after pain. We went to the practice room a few days later, just to sit in the space that had once been the center of our universe. The mirrors, the sweat, the echoes of music that had shaped us. It felt both nostalgic and haunting. Jimin sat on the floor, stretching his legs, and said, "You know, I used to think the only way to prove my worth was to keep going no matter what. But now I think it's braver to stop when you need to." I nodded slowly. Stopping doesn't mean giving up. He smiled. Exactly. It means choosing to live. That conversation stayed with me. It made me rethink everything, not just how I worked, but how I existed. I started noticing the small things again. The sound of rain on the dorm windows, the smell of coffee in the morning, the laughter that breaks out during rehearsals when someone forgets a step. These were things I used to overlook, too busy chasing something bigger. But those little things, they were life itself. One night, I recorded a voice memo on my phone. Just me, speaking to no one in particular. I said, "If I ever forget this moment, remind me that we're not machines. We're people, and people need pauses." It wasn't meant to be shared, but somehow, saying it out loud felt like a promise to myself, to Jimin, to everyone I love. As weeks turned into months, Jimin grew stronger. We started rehearsing again, slowly, carefully. But something had changed between us, something unspoken. Our conversations became deeper, quieter, more honest. We didn't need to fill every silence with laughter or noise. Sometimes we just looked at each other and understood. That's what happens when you face fragility together. Words become secondary. And yet, even with all that healing, there was still a shadow inside me, a lingering fear that I could lose him again, or that I could lose anyone I loved at any moment. That fear wasn't paralyzing anymore, but it kept me grounded. It reminded me that nothing lasts forever, and that's exactly why every second matters. It was around that time I started reevaluating everything, my schedule, my habits, even the way I talk to people. I began setting boundaries that I used to think were selfish. Turning off my phone for an hour, eating dinner without checking messages, spending a day in silence just to feel what stillness feels like. And every time I did, I thought of Jimin the night he almost disappeared, the morning he came back, the lessons he unknowingly gave me. Something serious happened to Jimin, but maybe, in a way, it needed to happen, not as punishment, but as awakening. It shook both of us out of a sleep we didn't know we were in. It made me realize that love, friendship, and meaning aren't found in grand gestures or perfect performances. They're found in the quiet presence of a moment you refuse to rush through. Sometimes when I see him now laughing, dancing again, his energy filling the room, I still remember that night. And I think about how fragile this all is. How one heartbeat can change everything. How one call can rewrite your entire definition of living. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that success isn't about how far you go. It's about how deeply you live. It's not about how many people cheer for you, but how many souls you truly connect with. And it's not about how long you last in the spotlight, but how present you are in the moments that matter. That's what Jimin taught me without even meaning to. When Jimin returned to the public eye, it was as if the world had been waiting for a miracle. Cameras flashed the moment he stepped out of the van. and headlines filled the internet like a storm that never sleeps. Jimin returned stronger than ever. BTS reunited after health scare. Jungkook seen supporting Jimin through recovery. It was all there. Pictures, clips, fan edits, each one turning our private pain into a public story. I should have been used to that by now. But this time, it felt different. The noise around us was deafening, but inside me, everything had gone quiet. Standing next to Jimin at that first press event, I remember the lights burning against my face. They felt heavier than usual, almost intrusive, like they were trying to expose something I wasn't ready to show. Reporters shouted questions. Most were harmless, the kind we'd answered 1,000 times before. But one voice cut through the noise. "Jungkook, were you worried when Jimin collapsed?" The room went still for a moment. My throat tightened. I forced a smile, that kind of smile idols learn to build like armor. "Of course," I said. "He's my brother." We all worried, but he's strong. He's back. It was the truth, but only half of it. What I wanted to say was that the word worried didn't even come close. That I had felt my soul break when I heard that phone call. That for weeks afterward, even when Jimin was recovering, I'd wake up in the middle of the night expecting another call. But in our world, truth has to fit inside a headline. So you learn to edit your soul before it leaves your mouth. The event ended, the crowd cheered, and we bowed as always. But something about it felt hollow, like applause, echoing in an empty room. Afterward, in the van, Jimin leaned his head back inside. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said softly. "How everyone wants to talk about how strong we are, but not how scared we were." I nodded. "Because fear doesn't trend," I said, half joking. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "Maybe it should." That night, I scrolled through social media. Thousands of messages flooded my feed, fans saying they were relieved. Others saying they cried, others thanking us for being inspirations. I read every word, but instead of pride, I felt a quiet ache. Because I realized that behind all those messages were people who also carried invisible pain. They were thanking us for surviving something they might be living to exhaustion, loneliness, the pressure to smile even when they're breaking. The next morning, I had to film a solo interview. The crew set up in a minimalist studio, black walls, one chair, one camera. "Just speak from your heart," the director said. "Easy words, impossible task." When the camera started rolling, I took a breath. "How have things changed since Jimin's recovery?" the interviewer asked. I paused longer than I should have. "It made me think about how fragile everything is," I said finally. "Sometimes we forget that even the people who look the strongest are fighting battles no one sees." The interviewer nodded, clearly expecting me to elaborate. "Was it hard for you personally?" she asked. That question hit deeper than I expected. I looked down, searching for an answer that wouldn't sound rehearsed. "It reminded me that being busy isn't the same as being alive," I said quietly. The room fell silent. The crew stopped moving. For a second, I forgot I was being filmed. I wasn't Jungkook the artist. I was just Jungkook, the human being who had spent too long running. When the interview aired, fans flooded the comments with empathy. They said I looked different, more mature, so calm. But the truth is, I wasn't calm. I was still shaken. Still learning how to exist in a world that demanded so much while giving you so little time to breathe. Promotions resumed. Schedules filled up again. Everything went back to normal. But it didn't feel normal. Every stage, every performance, every airport run, it all carried a new weight. Before stepping on stage, I look at Jimin and think, he's really here. That used to be something I took for granted. Now it felt sacred. We didn't need to talk about it. A single glance before the lights went up was enough. That glance said, I'm here too. Let's live this moment. There were moments during those promotions when Jimin would smile so brightly that the fans screamed his name like an anthem. I'd look at him and think how close we came to never seeing that smile again. Sometimes I'd forget my own lines, distracted by the raw gratitude of simply being beside him. I never said that out loud. Some things are too real for microphones. The media kept asking questions about resilience, about overcoming hardship, about how we stay positive under pressure. I learned to answer with phrases that sound good on camera. Teamwork, love for music, connection with fans. But deep down, I knew resilience isn't about smiling through pain. It's about acknowledging that pain and choosing to show up anyway. Jimin taught me that. One evening, After a long day of rehearsals, we sat in the empty practice room. The mirrors reflected the dim lights, our reflections looking older somehow, quieter. You think they'll ever know what it really feels like? Jimin asked, stretching his legs. I shrugged. Maybe not, but maybe that's okay. Maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe what matters is that they feel something when they watch us. He nodded slowly. Then let's make sure what they feel is real. Those words stayed in my mind for days. They became a kind of mantra. Every performance after that felt like more than just choreography and notes. It felt like a conversation between us, the fans, and something larger than both. A silent exchange of emotion that said, we're still here, and so are you. But not everything was easy. Fame doesn't pause just because your soul needs rest. There were still days when exhaustion crept back, when schedules blurred into each other, when my body moved automatically while my mind lagged behind. In those moments, I'd think back to that hospital room, the stillness, the beeping machines, the fragile miracle of breathing, and it would ground me. I started carrying a small notebook everywhere. Every night, before sleeping, I'd write one sentence beginning with the same words. Today, I was truly present when sometimes it was something small, like watching the sunrise. Sometimes it was just laughing with the members over dinner. But it helped me remember that living wasn't something that happened later. It was happening now. A few weeks later, we had our first live show since Jimin's recovery. The crowd was massive lights stretching as far as the eye could see, voices blending into one infinite wave. As the opening notes played, I glanced sideways at him. He looked calm, steady, glowing under the spotlight. For a brief second, I saw not the performer, but the friend who had survived something invisible. The music swelled, and I felt tears pressing against my chest, the kind that never quite reach your eyes but burn just the same. After the show, backstage was chaos, stylists, staff, laughter, relief. But when the noise died down, Jimin pulled me aside. You okay? He asked. I nodded. You? He smiled faintly. I am, for real this time. And I believed him. There was something different in his tone, a peace that comes only after surviving what almost broke you. Later that night, I looked out the hotel window at the city lights and thought about everything we'd been through. It's easy to think of life as a series of big moments, concerts, awards, achievements, but the truth is, life happens in the spaces between. The quiet moments no one records. The silent glances that carry more weight than words. The simple act of holding on when everything tells you to let go. In the following weeks, fans began noticing changes in our music. The lyrics grew deeper, the melodies softer, more vulnerable. What they didn't know was that every note carried traces of that night, the fear, the gratitude, the rebirth. One song in particular came from something I wrote in my notebook. If I lose today, let me still feel the wind. It became a lyric in a track we would later perform together. When Jimin sang his part during recording, his voice cracked slightly. The engineer looked up, worried, but I smiled. That imperfection was the most honest sound I'd ever heard. During one interview, a journalist asked me, "What's the most important thing you've learned in the past year?" Without thinking, I said, "That presence is stronger than perfection." The interviewer blinked, probably expecting a more polished answer, but I meant it. Presence being here. Now, with the people you love, that's everything. Not long after, a fan from the Philippines wrote me a letter. She said she had been going through her own struggles, and that watching our performances helped her feel alive again. When I saw you look at Jimin on stage, she wrote, it reminded me to look at my own best friend with gratitude. I read that letter 3 times, because that's the thing, you never know how your healing might become someone else's hope. These days, whenever we step on stage, I whisper a small promise to myself. It's simple. Be here, fully, no matter the chaos, no matter the cameras, no matter the noise. Because I know now that being alive isn't about existing under lights. It's about staying connected to the ones who stand beside you in the dark. I don't know if the world will ever fully understand what that night did to me. Maybe they don't need to. But I carry it with me in every song, every silence, every breath before the curtain rises. Because something serious happened to Jimin. And through it, something changed in me forever. The first time I stepped back into the recording studio after Jimin's recovery, the silence hit me harder than any applause ever could. There were no flashing lights, no choreography, no rehearsed smiles. Just a microphone standing in front of me, waiting. The engineer's voice came through the intercom, soft but distant. Whenever you're ready. I wasn't. Not yet. I closed my eyes, hearing echoes of that hospital monitor, that slow, steady beep that had once terrified me. Now it sounded almost like a metronome, life's own rhythm, reminding me how fragile everything really was. I started singing quietly at first, just humming, almost whispering. The melody was simple, stripped of everything unnecessary. For once, I didn't care about hitting the perfect note. I wanted to feel something real. Each word I wrote carried a piece of that night, the fear, the regret, the unspoken promise to never let life slip by unnoticed again. When I finished, the room was quiet. The producer didn't say a word for a long moment. Then he said, "That didn't sound like anything you've done before." I smiled faintly. Good. In the weeks that followed, something changed in the studio. I stopped chasing perfection. I started chasing truth. The sessions became less about crafting hits and more about capturing moments. I brought Jimin into the studio one afternoon. He looked around curious. "You're recording alone?" I nodded. Sometimes silence is the best collaborator. He laughed softly, but there was pride in his eyes. When I played him a demo of the song, I had written a slow, aching ballad called When the Lights Fade. He didn't say anything for almost a minute. Then he whispered, "This feels like a memory." We decided to finish it together. The energy between us that day was different, calmer, more honest. There was no pressure to impress anyone, just two people trying to tell the truth through sound. When Jimin recorded his verse, his voice cracked again, that same raw imperfection that had once worried engineers but now felt like the most human thing in the world. When we played it back, neither of us spoke. We just listened. And in that quiet moment, I realized something powerful. Music wasn't about escaping life anymore, it was about facing it. When the song was released, something unexpected happened. The world listened, really listened. The usual comments about visuals or choreography were replaced by paragraphs from fans talking about healing, grief, and second chances. "This song saved me," one wrote. "It reminded me to call someone I haven't talked to in years." I read those messages late at night, and for the first time in my career, I felt like the music was doing what it was meant to do. Connect, not impress. Then came the live performance. It was our first televised duet since Jimin's hospitalization, and the entire nation was watching. The stage was minimal, just two microphones, a piano, and a dim spotlight. Before we went on, Jimin looked at me backstage and said, "You ready?" I smiled. "I've been ready since the night I thought I lost you." He exhaled, nodded once, and we walked out. The audience went silent. The first notes echoed, soft and haunting. When Jimin started singing, I felt a lump rise in my throat. His voice was lighter, more fragile than before, but it carried something deeper acceptance. When my part came, I almost forgot the lyrics. Not because I was nervous, but because I was too present. Every second felt stretched, sacred. The camera zoomed in, capturing the trembling in my voice, the faint shimmer in Jimin's eyes. Halfway through the song, I turned slightly toward him. Our eyes met not as performers, but as two people who had lived through something words could never fully explain. That one look said everything. We're still here. We made it. When the song ended, the audience didn't cheer immediately. There was silence, the rarest sound in entertainment. Then, slowly, people began to stand, one by one, until the entire room was on its feet. Not screaming, not chanting, just clapping. A slow, unified rhythm that felt less like celebration and more like gratitude. It wasn't for us. It was for what we all shared in that moment, the reminder that being alive, really alive, is the most fragile miracle of all. After the show, the clip went viral. Millions of views in hours. But what struck me most wasn't the numbers, it was the comments. People wrote things like, "This performance made me call my parents. I hugged my brother after watching this. They reminded me to slow down." Reading those, I realized something. Dr. Bennett once told Elon Musk in that video I'd seen years before, "Impact without presence feels hollow, but presence even in silence can echo forever." The next day, we were invited for a global interview with a major American network. I didn't want to go at first. I've never liked interviews that reduce real life into sound bites. But Jimin insisted. "Let's tell them what really matters," he said. The studio in Los Angeles was freezing bright lights, makeup, touch-ups, everything calculated. The host smiled wide. It's wonderful to see you both back and thriving. The performance last night was beautiful. What inspired it? Jimin looked at me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how honest we were allowed to be. Then he said softly, it came from a place of remembering what almost got lost. The host tilted her head. What do you mean? I leaned forward slightly, my voice low. Sometimes life gives you a wake-up call, literally. Something that makes you realize you've been living fast but not deep. The host nodded, maybe not fully understanding but sensing the gravity. So, are you saying this experience changed how you see your careers? I smiled faintly. It changed how I see everything. The interview aired globally, and the response was overwhelming. But fame has a strange way of distorting even the most personal truths. Suddenly, headlines twisted our story into sensational lines. Jungkook and Jimin reveal secret health crisis that inspired new song. Others speculated about drama that never existed. It was frustrating, but also expected. The world loves spectacle. But behind all the noise, something quieter was happening. People were writing letters, sharing their own stories of burnout, loss, recovery. The real connection was happening beneath the headlines. As the months went on, we toured again. But this time, everything felt different. Before each concert, we'd gather the members in a circle, something we hadn't done in years. No staff, no cameras, just us. We'd take a deep breath together and say, let's be here. That simple ritual changed everything. The shows felt alive again, not polished, not perfect, but present. One night, during our world tour stop in London, something extraordinary happened. Right before we performed, when the lights fade, the power went out. Thousands of fans stood in darkness, the stage dead silent. For a few seconds, chaos rippled through the crowd. Then, slowly, voices began to rise. The fans without any music started singing the lyrics themselves. Thousands of people, in perfect unison, carrying the song through the dark. I stood there, frozen. Jimin turned toward me, his face lit only by the soft glow of phone lights held high. Listen, he whispered. The sound was pure, unfiltered humanity. No production, no perfection, just connection. When the power came back on, we didn't restart the track. We joined them, singing with nothing but our voices and the echo of the crowd. It was the most beautiful performance of my life. After the show, Jimin sat quietly in the dressing room, towel draped around his neck. You know, he said softly, I think that blackout was supposed to happen. I looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. It showed us that even when everything stops, the lights, the music, the fame, people still listen if the message is real. That night, lying in my hotel bed, I thought about what he said. Maybe he was right. Maybe presence isn't about control. It's about surrender, trusting that what's meant to reach people will, even in darkness. The following months were a blur of interviews, award shows, and flights. But something inside me stayed still, centered. I started noticing things I used to ignore: the nervous laughter of new staff, the quiet exhaustion in makeup artists' eyes, the way fans trembled when they met us. These were real moments. Tiny, fleeting, but real. And I wanted to honor them all. At the end of the tour, during our final encore in Seoul, I took a risk. As the music faded, I turned to the audience and spoke. I want to thank you, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Not just for coming here tonight, but for reminding me why I sing. This year, I almost forgot how precious life is. But someone reminded me. I looked at Jimin. He smiled softly, tears glistening. The crowd roared, but I didn't hear the noise. All I felt was presence, pure, overwhelming, sacred. Later, in the dressing room, Jimin hugged me. It wasn't the typical quick backstage hug. It was long, quiet, and real. Thank you, he whispered. I shook my head. No, thank you for staying. That moment, simple, wordless, human, meant more to me than any trophy or chart position ever could. Because for the first time in my career, I understood that music isn't about fame or validation. It's about connection, the invisible thread that binds hearts through sound. Now, months later, whenever I walk into a studio or step on stage, I carry that night inside me. The night the lights went out and the world kept singing. The night Jimin told me the truth. It wasn't under bright lights or in a studio. It was quiet, too quiet. We were in Busan, our hometown, filming something for a project that was supposed to celebrate our roots. The cameras had stopped rolling hours ago, and the staff had gone back to the hotel. Only the sound of the ocean remained, waves breaking softly against the rocks like time breathing in slow motion. Jimin and I sat on a weather-worn bench overlooking the water. It felt strange being there together, older, calmer, but still carrying the same ghost we never talked about. He had been quiet all day. I thought maybe he was just tired. The schedule had been long, the interviews endless. But when the sun began to sink, painting the sea golden crimson, I noticed his shoulders trembling slightly. "Are you cold?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I didn't wake up that night?" The question sliced through the silence. I froze, unable to respond. "Don't," I said instinctively. "Don't talk like that." He smiled, but there was no light in it. "I'm serious, Jungkook. I've thought about it a lot, because I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up." The world around us seemed to stop. The sound of the ocean dimmed, replaced by the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. I turned to face him, disbelief flashing across my face. "What are you saying?" He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You think I collapsed because I was overworked. That's what everyone believes. But it wasn't just exhaustion. It was everything. The pressure, the loneliness, the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough." His words hit me like cold rain. "Jimin," I whispered. But he didn't stop. I'd smile on stage and go home feeling empty. I'd post photos, laugh in interviews, but inside I was tired of pretending. That night, when I fainted, it wasn't just my body giving up. It was everything I'd been holding back for years. I couldn't speak. The confession hung between us like smoke heavy, suffocating, real. I remembered the doctor saying it was dehydration, fatigue. I remembered believing it because it was easier than facing the truth. But now, sitting beside him under the dying light, I understood. This wasn't just a story about physical collapse. It was a story about emotional survival. He laughed softly, but it broke halfway through. You know what the scariest part was? When I was lying there in that hospital bed, I didn't feel fear. I felt relief, like maybe I didn't have to keep performing my life anymore. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, that he couldn't think that way. But something in me knew shouting would only make the wound deeper. So I said nothing. I just listened. The same way he had listened to me all those years ago when I was too young, too lost, too scared to speak. I kept wondering, he continued, voice trembling. Would anyone notice if I disappeared? Or would they just say I needed rest and move on to the next headline? He looked at me then, his eyes wet but steady. You would have noticed, wouldn't you? The question shattered whatever wall I had left. Of course I would have, I said, louder than I meant to. I would have done anything to stop it. I thought you were okay, Jimin. You said you were fine. He nodded slowly. I said that because it's what everyone wanted to hear. I'm fine is easier than I'm drowning. For a long time, we sat in silence. The sun had vanished completely, leaving only the reflection of the moon on the water fragile, trembling, like both of us. Then he said something I'll never forget. Do you know why I called my manager that night before I collapsed? It wasn't because I needed help with schedules. I just didn't want to be alone anymore. My throat tightened. Every memory of that night came flooding back: the phone call, the rush to the hospital, the sterile lights, the fear, and now, the truth. He hadn't been reaching for medical help. He had been reaching for someone who would listen, and none of us heard him in time. I felt tears sting my eyes. I'm sorry, I whispered. I should have seen it. I should have been there. He shook his head gently. No, Jungkook, you were there when it mattered. You came when I needed you most. That's why I'm still here. He smiled faintly, that familiar, quiet smile that always carried too much sadness behind it. But I need you to understand something. What happened to me, it wasn't just about me. It's about all of us. The way we keep pushing, performing, pretending until our hearts can't keep up. I looked down at my hands, trembling slightly. I know, I felt it too. He nodded. Then promise me something. Don't ever let the world convince you that you have to earn your right to rest. The words settled in my chest like an anchor. I wanted to promise him everything to protect him, to make sure he'd never fall that far again. But promises can't change the past. Only how you move forward. I nodded slowly. I promise. We stayed there for hours, talking about things we'd never dared to say out loud. About the fear of disappointing people. About the loneliness that follows fame like a shadow. About how easy it is to lose yourself in applause. And for the first time in a long time, we weren't idols. We were just two friends trying to find light in a world that never turns off. When we finally stood to leave, Jimin placed his hand on my shoulder. "Thank you for listening," he said quietly. "I didn't tell you this to make you feel guilty. I told you because I needed you to know what silence can do." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words replayed in my head over and over. Silence can kill you. I realized how many times I told myself I was fine when I wasn't. How often I'd chosen to keep quiet instead of admitting I needed help. And I realized that maybe the bravest thing we can do isn't to keep going, it's to speak up before we break. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run along the shore. The air was sharp and cold, biting against my lungs. Every breath felt heavy, alive. I thought about what Jimin had said, how the world measures worth by productivity. How people praise exhaustion as if it's proof of dedication. And I decided I didn't want to live that way anymore. When we got back to Seoul, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had shifted again. During rehearsals, I caught myself watching Jimin more closely, not as a teammate, but as a human being I almost lost. He laughed more now, but sometimes his eyes still drifted somewhere distant. I didn't press him, I just stayed close, quietly, making sure he knew he wasn't alone. A few weeks later, we were invited to perform at an international awards show in New York. The producers wanted us to open the event with a high-energy song, something powerful and fast. But Jimin suggested something else. "What if we start with When the Lights Fade instead?" he said during rehearsal. The staff hesitated. "It's too emotional," they said. "People expect excitement." But Jimin didn't back down. "Then let them feel something real first." We opened with that song. No fireworks, no pyrotechnics, just us. The crowd was silent as the first notes played. As I began singing, I thought about that night in Busan, about his voice saying, "I wasn't sure I wanted to wake up," and I felt the weight of every word. By the time Jimin sang his verse, I could see tears in the audience. People were holding each other, some recording through shaking hands. And when the lights dimmed at the end, you could hear sobs even through the applause. Afterward, backstage, Jimin turned to me and said, "That was the first time I sang without pretending." I nodded, and they felt it. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it was worth it. News outlets called it the most vulnerable performance of the year. Critics said it redefined what authenticity looks like in pop. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that somewhere out there, maybe someone heard those lyrics and decided to keep going. In the weeks that followed, messages poured in. Not just from fans, but from other artists. Some we'd never met sharing their own stories of burnout and hidden pain. One message, from a singer in the Philippines, said, "Your song made me cancel a concert and rest for the first time in 5 years. Thank you for reminding me I'm human." I showed it to Jimin, and he just smiled. That's the real award. But behind the beauty of that connection, there was still fear. Jimin's confession had opened something inside both of us, a wound and a responsibility. We started speaking more openly in interviews, about rest, about mental health, about slowing down. Some people praised us for our honesty. Others criticized us, saying idols should be stronger, more disciplined. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't speaking for approval. I was speaking because I'd seen what silence can destroy. One night, after another long day of promotions, we sat together again, this time on the rooftop of the company building, the city lights glittering below like 1,000 tiny universes. Jimin looked up at the sky. "Do you ever think about what comes after all this?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I'm not in a rush to find out." He laughed softly. "Good, then let's make sure what we have now actually means something." I nodded. "It already does." He turned to me then, serious. "You saved me, Jungkook. Not by doing anything dramatic, just by showing up. Remember that." I swallowed hard, looking at him, the friend, the brother, the mirror of my own struggles. "You saved me too," I said quietly. In that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the people who seem the strongest are the ones holding the most fragile parts of you together. As the wind brushed against our faces, I thought about everything that had led us here. The phone call, the hospital, the music, the confessions. It all felt like chapters of a story that was still being written. And for the first time, I didn't fear what would come next. Because now, I understood that as long as we kept showing up for each other, no darkness could last forever. That night, before I went to sleep, I wrote a single line in my notebook. He chose to stay, so I will choose to live. The morning, everything changed again. The world woke up before we did. My phone started vibrating endlessly on the nightstand, notifications stacking faster than I could swipe them away. I didn't even open the messages at first. I just stared at the light flashing against the wall, knowing instinctively that something was wrong. When I finally unlocked the screen, my chest went cold. Headlines were everywhere. Jimin opens up about depression and collapse in leaked interview. And my first thought wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear for him. Fear for what the world would do with something so delicate. Within minutes, social media exploded. Millions of fans were flooding timelines with concern, confusion, speculation. Clips from an unreleased documentary had somehow been leaked, raw footage of Jimin speaking with trembling honesty about the night he almost gave up. I remember running down the hallway to his room, knocking hard. He opened the door slowly, already dressed, his eyes heavy but calm, like someone who'd been expecting the storm. "You saw it?" he asked. I nodded. "How bad is it?" he said. "It's everywhere," I answered quietly. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I didn't think they'd use that part," he whispered. "It wasn't supposed to air." His voice cracked, the same way it had when he told me the truth that night in Busan. For a second, neither of us spoke. I wanted to protect him, to fix it somehow. But how do you protect someone from the internet? It's like trying to hold back the tide with your hands. The company called an emergency meeting that afternoon. The conference room was tense, filled with publicists and executives, talking in circles, damage control, press statements, legal options. Jimin sat silently beside me, his mask on the table, his fingers interlocked tightly. Someone suggested denying the footage, calling it taken out of context. Another said we should release a short apology for misunderstanding. I looked at them, then at Jimin. His eyes said everything. No more pretending. He cleared his throat. "Don't deny it," he said quietly. The room went silent. "If it's out there, then let it be real. I'm tired of hiding the parts of me that aren't perfect." One of the executives frowned. "You don't understand how headlines work. They'll twist everything." Jimin nodded slowly. "They already have. But maybe that's not the problem. Maybe the problem is that we've let them." Everyone turned to me next. "Jungkook, what do you think?" I looked around the room at all the worried faces, the people calculating risks and reputations, and said the only thing that felt true. He's right. We've spent years teaching people to see us as flawless. Maybe it's time they see us as human. The decision was made. Instead of denying the leak, we would address it head-on. That night, we posted a joint statement. Simple, honest. Jimin wrote most of it himself. I spoke about a difficult time in my life. Those words were meant to help someone who might feel the same. Please don't turn pain into gossip. Turn it into understanding. Within hours, the internet divided in two. Half the world sent love, sharing their own stories of struggle. The other half speculated, analyzed, sensationalized, but something inside me had changed. I no longer feared the noise. Because behind every comment, every opinion, there were real people listening. And if even one person felt less alone because of his truth, it was worth it. 2 days later, we appeared together at a live press event. Cameras flashed the moment we walked in. I could feel the heat of them against my skin. Reporters shouted questions like darts. "Jimin, were you suicidal?" "Jungkook, did you know about his mental health?" "How did this affect the group?" The room buzzed with impatience, hungry for sound bites. Jimin adjusted his microphone, his hands trembling slightly. "I want to answer that honestly," he said. "Yes, I struggled. For a long time. And I hid it because I thought I had to be strong for everyone else. But pretending didn't make me strong. Speaking did." There was a collective hush. I watched his face vulnerable, steady, brave, and felt something inside me ache with pride. When it was my turn to speak, I took a breath. "When you care about someone deeply," I said, "you don't just celebrate their best moments. You stand with them through their worst. That's what family does. That's what friendship means. The room erupted with flashes again, but this time, it didn't feel invasive. It felt like light harsh, yes, but illuminating something that needed to be seen. That night, global headlines changed. Jimin and Jungkook break silence on mental health. An unfiltered conversation about survival. For the first time, the story wasn't about scandal, it was about humanity. Messages poured in from artists, activists, and even strangers outside the fandom. One letter came from a soldier in Australia who wrote, "Hearing Jimin say those words made me ask for help for the first time in 10 years. Another came from a teenage boy in California. I showed your interview to my mom. We cried together. Thank you." Reading those messages, I realized that truth spreads the same way. Fear does fast. Uncontrollable, but unlike fear, truth heals. Still, the days that followed weren't easy. Every public appearance felt like walking through fire. Some journalists tried to twist our words, frame it as a publicity stunt, a manufactured redemption arc. Others speculated about our relationship, searching for drama where there was none. It was exhausting. But each night, when Jimin and I sat in the quiet of our dressing room, we'd remind ourselves why we spoke out in the first place, not to control the story, but to free ourselves from it. A week later, we performed again. The energy was electric, different. The fans didn't just cheer, they cried, screamed our names with a kind of tenderness that felt like forgiveness. During When the Lights Fade, the arena lights dimmed, and thousands of phones lit up like stars. Jimin's voice shook as he sang the final chorus. I walked toward him, placed my hand over his mic, and whispered so only he could hear. "You did it! You turned pain into power." He nodded, tears spilling down his face. After the concert, backstage was chaos, press, staff, endless congratulations. But we slipped away quietly, out a side door, into the cool night air. The city hummed around us. "Do you think we did the right thing?" he asked. I looked at him. "We told the truth. That's always the right thing." He exhaled slowly. "Then I can live with that." In the months that followed, everything evolved. Our music changed, less polish, more heart. Interviews became conversations instead of performances. And slowly, the world began to see us differently, not as perfect idols, but as people. Some fans said that made them love us more. Others said it made them see themselves in us. That was enough. Then came the documentary release, the real one this time, not the leaked fragments. We insisted on keeping Jimin's confession in it, unedited. I narrated part of it, my voice low, reflective. Sometimes the bravest act is simply to keep breathing, to stay when everything in you says to run. When it premiered, there was silence in the theater. No applause, just people sitting there, absorbing the truth. And in that silence, I felt peace. But fame doesn't rest, and neither do rumors. A month later, a tabloid published a twisted version of our story painting Jimin as unstable, framing our friendship as codependence. It spread fast, feeding on the same curiosity that once cheered for our honesty. I remember slamming the article down on the table, anger boiling in my chest. "They can't do this again," I said. "They can't turn something sacred into spectacle." Jimin stayed calm. "They already did," he said softly. "But they can't touch what's real." His calmness both infuriated and inspired me. "How are you not angry?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because I already survived the worst. Everything after that is just noise." That night, instead of fighting the headlines, we did something else. We went live on Weverse, just the two of us. No script, no makeup. We sat in the studio, guitars beside us, coffee cups on the table. "We're not here to explain," I said to the camera. "We just wanted to talk. About life. About being human." For an hour, we answered fans' questions, laughed about old stories, even joked about the leak. At one point, someone commented, "Are you okay now?" Jimin smiled gently and said, "I'm not perfect, but I'm present. That's enough." The chat exploded with hearts, tears, and love. That simple sentence became a global trend within minutes. Number and present, that's enough. People began using it to share their own recoveries, their daily struggles, their small victories. In a world obsessed with success, that phrase became a quiet rebellion. Later, when the live stream ended, we sat in silence, watching the comments still flooding in long after the feed stopped. "Do you see what you did?" I said. He shook his head. "No," he whispered, "what we did." In that moment, I understood something deeper about truth. It's contagious. Once spoken, it multiplies in the hearts of those who need it most. Weeks later, when award season came, when the lights fade won Song of the Year. We didn't expect it. When our names were called, Jimin froze. I nudged him. Come on,